So thanks for having me here. I appreciate it, the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the study that we have coming up. I'll just say I'm not usually on this side. I'm usually organizing the meetings, so bear with me, and bear with me that I'm not, my role is not to talk about my opinions or thoughts about these scientific issues so much as to give you an idea about what's coming up and what we're doing, have going on that I think has a lot of relevance to the discussions that were taking place today. So I will be talking, which button do I push, Erin? This one? Okay. Usually I have someone else to tell people how to push the buttons. So I will be talking a little bit about this new study that we have, and I'll also would like to talk first for just a couple of quick slides about some related work that's preceded this study. And both of these that I'm going to be talking about are not really about TSCA and regulations per se. They're about there was a discussion earlier about what are some new kinds of approaches to market-driven or other ways of looking at chemical safety. So the first thing I'll just mention is, Isla mentioned this briefly, the Emerging Science for Environmental Health Decisions Committee, which is sponsored by the NIEHS, who has had a number of discussions that are not consensus reports, but they are quite useful workshop discussions that are webcasts, so anyone can watch them. They're all archived webcasts, actually, so they're all still available online. One of them, Isla, was fed into the Isla's discussions, was this one sponsored by EPA on systems biology informed risk assessment. But the other one that I wanted to mention a little bit was this one on green chemistry that was held back in 2011 at the House of Sweden in Washington. It's just kind of interesting holding a green chemistry meeting at a place that has lots of IKEA things. For those of you who know, IKEA is one of the sort of leaders on some chemistry thinking. And I, as a staff person, rather than a committee member, will not be, like I said, talking a lot about my opinions. So I'm bringing up some opinions and thoughts that were discussed at this, at this meeting. And these are captured in a newsletter that's on the desk outside on the green chemistry in about 10 pages. So there's actually quite a lot more detail there. But this particular meeting was about using toxicology, and particularly new toxicology approaches, some of the ones that Isla described, where we are starting to understand more about mechanisms, and using those early on in the chemistry design process. So it was about trying to bridge that gap between toxicology and chemical design. Much has, as Polanastis would say, that's been largely a separation, that to advance green chemistry, we need to have a lot more interaction between the toxicologist and the chemist, not unlike what happens in the pharmaceutical industry, where there's a lot of rational drug design, which looks at the structures of chemicals and how those impact the pharmaceutical activity. So some of the comments and things since I pulled that I thought were interesting from the meeting were Richard Dennison was talking a lot about how the new rapid, high throughput, high content, rapid I guess might be a misnomer, it's high throughput, high content data isn't always rapid to analyze, but that should allow more assessment near the beginning of the chemical design process, so that chemicals can be designed to be inherently more safe, which is of course the mantra of the green chemistry world. And this meeting was trying to get at how what do toxicologists know that could inform that? And what are the limitations of what toxicologists know, I think was just as important. So we had, I don't do a lot of animations here, so I'm not used to doing those. We had Thad Shug from NIEHS talked a lot about tiered endocrine disruption processes and testing, and this was back in 2012, so significant work has been done since then. Robert Tangway and Jim Hutchison talked about the importance of using simple organisms such as zebrafish as sort of a not in vitro, not fully mammal rodent testing. And they also presented an interesting example of a chemical design people working with a toxicologist quite closely. And they were working particularly on nanomaterials. And then Alex Tropsha talked about the importance of and new approaches for combining short-term biologic assays to inform the structure-activity relationship. So not just looking at structure and modeling, but informing that with in vitro assays. All right. Okay. Well, now I'm going to shift to this new study that we are doing for the EPA. And this is coming out of the fact of the interest in TSCA that we've talked about. I think someone mentioned, Richard did, the Walmart has recently also put a number of chemicals on their list for things that they won't be carrying. So there's a lot of things, of course, going on in this area. I don't think I need to tell this group. But there's also a lot of different approaches for comparing chemical alternatives, or comparing chemical substitutions. And I just put the few that I could quickly find logos for. But these are just a small set of them. There's Green Screen, Clean Ingredients, Green List from S.C. Johnson Wax, or S.C. Johnson. There's IC2 out of the Interstate Chemicals Clearinghouse. Of course, most of you are familiar with the Design for the Environment out of EPA. The California has their own efforts on looking for safer products. And there's one that called Subsport, which I know a little bit less about. So these are just a few, like I said, of the different, approaches. And these differ in a number of ways. They differ in their consideration of health effects, health and safety, versus ecological risks, so aquatic toxicity, for example, or their environmental impacts of chemicals that they, when they're comparing alternatives, they differ in those things. And even within a given category, they differ in how they handle uncertainty, how they handle where there is no data. How that fits into the alternative analysis varies considerably amongst these different kinds of approaches and frameworks. And some of them also are not actually very transparent, so you don't actually know what all goes into the alternative analysis. But just to give an example, like Cradle to Cradle is one that includes everything from environmental impact as in greenhouse gases and water use to social fairness. And I think that's a pretty broad number of things to include, and some of the others are more focused on hazard or safety. So the new study that we are looking at, which we are getting ready to undertake here at the National Research Council, is to put together, the hope is to put together a more universally accepted framework approach to evaluating substitutions to enable a wider use of appropriate evaluations. I think most people would agree that if there was some harmonization or at least understanding about the different kinds of approaches and the appropriateness of them for different uses, that would allow wider use of this comparison of chemical options. Also, it's to hope that such a more universally accepted approach could allow for the planning of scientific information and tools that will be required for such approach, increase the dialogue amongst different stakeholders by having that be clearer. So the sponsor, like I said, of this study is EPA, specifically the Office of Research and Development. Tina's out here, Tina Bahadori, with the ORD. And this is being done out of the Division on Earth and Life Studies here. It's a collaboration between the Board on Chemical Sciences and Technology and the Board on Environmental Studies and Toxicology. So here is the official statement of task for the report. This is a lot of text, so I've broken this down into some bullet points. Basically, the decision framework is intended to support consideration of potential impacts early in chemical design, to consider how to integrate health and ecological risks within the framework, how to integrate different kinds of data streams, including new types of data that's non-traditional toxicity kind of data like Isla was referring to, how to consider trade-offs between risks and factors such as product functionality, efficacy, does the thing work as expected? And also the framework is supposed to help with identifying the scientific information and tools required to implement it. And so this is the committee's charge, and the committee is also charged with coming up with a couple of, or developing a couple of examples to demonstrate how the framework is going to work, covering how the framework would work with different kinds of decision contexts, harking back to the Science and Decision Silver Report about different decision contexts. And as I mentioned before, the use of the high throughput content data streams. So the committee hasn't actually started its work yet, and I wouldn't be able to talk about it until the end anyways, but I can tell you who's on the committee, and I'll tell you a little bit about the schedule. So here's our committee membership. David Dorman of North Carolina State is the chair. I won't go through the whole list of people, but you'll see we have people with expertise in alternative assessment, decision analysis, toxicology, various kinds of toxicology, green chemistry, et cetera. And this committee's schedule is that they are having their first, I put 2014, that should be 2013. Having the first meeting next week. The first meeting was postponed because of the government shutdown. So they'll be meeting next Friday and Saturday, the Friday part being the open to the public information gathering session. I have put agendas for that meeting outside on the table. If anyone's interested in coming, there will be an opportunity for public comments into the committee's process. And the meeting will also be available by WebEx, which is a low-tech webcast. And we're anticipating that the report will be released in fall of 2014. So fall has an asterisk because we're adjusting that for the government shutdown. Lots of implications. So if you would like more information, I'm sorry I won't be able to talk a lot about the content at this point, obviously, but this is our website where more information is available, and here's my contact information.